right in the middle of my daughter's rehearsal at Carmel Highlands, under the expensive amber lights and the clinking champagne glasses that sounded like mockery, I heard her future groom standing with his mother in a hidden hallway and saying the words I can still hear with perfect clarity. 30 minutes before the ceremony, we drop her affair photos. She collapses. We scoop up all the wedding gifts, the jewelry, the cash, and we're done with the crypto debt. I stood not even 2 steps away, holding my breath in the dark. That was the first moment in my life as an old shoemaker that I saw the true faces of the people about to enter my family through a wedding. And I swore, right there in that metal-cold hallway, this humiliation would not end on my daughter's head. If you've ever witnessed someone disrespect your loved one, ever heard words that froze your blood in a room full of people, leave a single dot and tell me where you're watching from. Your presence helps me continue telling these journeys toward justice in the rawest, truest way. Monterey afternoons always carry a kind of light that makes me feel both reassured and as if I'm standing on the edge of a cliff. Warm gold, but with the chill of the Pacific Ocean braided into it. That light poured through the windows of Alden's Leatherworks and settled on the walnut workbench where I have sat for nearly 40 years. The hides hanging along the walls breathed their familiar scent, smoke, conditioning oil, and that faint, musky note anyone who loves shoemaking could recognize while blindfolded. I held the beeswax thread, guided it through the needle, and felt the wax soften on my fingers. The pair of shoes I was stitching was for Marissa, my daughter. Deep brown, classic lines, the toes slightly upturned to cradle the shape of her foot. I'd chosen Italian goat leather, a type I don't use often because it's expensive and hard to find, but today I wanted the very best for the only child I have who's about to step into a new life. I tapped the hammer 3 times, light and precise. That sound has always calmed me, but today even the hammer couldn't shake off the unease crawling at the back of my neck. I didn't know where it came from. Maybe from the look in Colton Hayes' eyes, the man Marissa is about to marry. I didn't hate the boy, but I had never once seen in his eyes the sincerity a man should have when he talks about the woman of his life. He spoke smoothly, smiled on cue, but that smile always lacked a root. When the shop's clock inched close to 3:30, I boxed the shoes, laid a soft cloth over them, then locked up. I climbed into my old pickup, the one I keep because I hate feeling alien in anything too new, and drove toward Monarch Point Lodge in Carmel Highlands, where the rehearsal was being held. That lodge was a strange place, beautiful in an unbelievable way, but it made people who've lived by their hands like me feel a bit misplaced. Light-colored wood, huge glass panes facing the ocean, honey-colored chandeliers, and the sound of waves beneath the cliffs that felt like the long sigh of someone holding too many secrets. The wedding planner pointed me toward the back hall, but out of habit, like a man used to finding shortcuts through tight aisles in a workshop, I took a wrong turn into a side corridor. White LED lights poured onto the gray stone floor, making it feel as cold as a morgue. I was about to turn around when I heard Colton's voice. "You sure, Mom? What if she finds out?" I stopped. Not the polite kind of stop. The kind where it feels like someone grabbed you by the collar and yanked. A woman's voice answered, sharp, thin, cold, like a blade being fitted into an unpolished soul. "Exactly 3:30, right in the middle of the vows. You show the photos. I'll stand up and accuse her of cheating. Panic will do the rest." I didn't inhale. I didn't exhale. The only air in my body was suspicion turning into truth. Colton lowered his voice. "And the crypto debt. You didn't forget, right?" How could I forget? All we need are the wedding gifts, the jewelry, and the cash. They're rich. You're not marrying her for love. You're erasing that stupid $92,000 debt. Remember? I felt my hand go numb. What I heard wasn't a plan. It sounded like a contract that had been agreed on long ago. They trust you, Vivian continued. They won't have time to inspect the photos I photoshopped. Same lighting, her face pasted in. Enough. Who questions anything in the chaos of a wedding? Colton laughed. The laugh was short, but I heard in it the same cruelty I'd noticed in a few dishonest customers, trying to hide a cheap cut. Then I'll play the betrayed man. People will pity me. Simple. I stepped back unconsciously. The rubber sole of my shoe tapped the stone. Thock. Soft. But enough to knock my heart off rhythm. Just before turning around, I don't know why, but I opened my voice recorder app, a habit of an old craftsman always recording ideas. My phone slipped from my hand and hit the floor. Luckily, it didn't crack. When I picked it up, the red record icon was still blinking. I pressed myself against the wall. My back met the cold stone. The phone was in my hand, my thumb pressing the blinking red circle. I heard footsteps approaching, stopping, then retreating. Colton said, "Probably staff. Let's go." When their footsteps faded, I realized I was breathing like someone running from a fire. I was still recording. The phone was still rolling, and my heart was hammering like a soul being nailed on. I don't know how long I stood there. I only remember that when I finally looked up, the long LED light above cast straight onto my face, white and cold, revealing every wrinkle, every hollow, every mark of the years I thought had hardened me enough not to buckle. I was wrong. I'm no stronger than any father who hears his daughter is about to be turned into a cheater at her own wedding. I clenched the phone so hard my knuckles went pale, and in that freezing hallway, with the smell of industrial cleaner and the distant crash of waves against the cliffs, I knew one thing for certain. You picked the wrong girl to mess with. I turned and walked out of the hallway. My old legs didn't shake. Only one thought drove through my mind like a steel nail. This stunt will be paid for. I drove back to Monterey in a state I wouldn't wish on anyone. It felt like a pair of souls with a broken shank, still holding its shape, but unable to support a single step. Streetlights swept across the dashboard of my pickup, revealing my hands trembling, an uncontrollable tremor I had never known. I once worked on shoes thin as paper, even stitched wool into a collar without missing half a line. Yet tonight, I couldn't keep my own fingers steady. When I opened the shop, the familiar sense of leather, beeswax, and polish rushed out as if they wanted to embrace me. But instead of peace, I felt a sickening sway inside. I sat at the bench, meaning to finish the edge of the shoe, but the moment the needle touched the leather, I stabbed sideways. The stitch warped, a thing that had rarely happened in my entire life in the trade. I set the needle down, rubbed my hands together to calm myself, but nothing worked. My mind only replayed Vivian and Colton's voices, word for word, like a broken tape looping inside a factory. My phone buzzed. The caller ID lit up. Eli. The kid had been living in Seoul for more than 4 years. We talked every week, but he rarely called at this hour. I answered the video call. His face appeared a little blurry under the neon lights behind him. "Dad?" He frowned. "What's wrong? You don't look okay." I couldn't answer right away. I simply turned the camera so he could see my hands. He went quiet for a few seconds. Then his voice softened. "Tell me, Dad." I sank into the wooden chair with its worn armrests and told him everything, every word, every sound, nothing added, nothing left out. When I mentioned the $92,000 debt and the plan to destroy Marissa's wedding, I saw Eli's fingers tighten on his backpack strap. I knew it. I knew something was wrong with that guy. I told Marissa. They listened to their hearts first, their heads later. I sighed. Eli pushed his hair back like he was trying to clear a path through his thoughts. "Dad, you can't let them just do whatever they want. You have to step in. I know you don't like being involved in messy things, but this time, you can't stay out of it." I looked at the kid's face. His eyes were like his mother's when she was alive, warm but with a steel line inside. Through the years, I'd taught him many things, but in that moment, he was teaching me the most important one. Some battles demand that you walk into them even if you don't want to. They want to break Marissa, Eli said. You have to do the opposite. Make her stand. I nodded slightly. I know. We talked a bit more and ended the call, but his words stayed with me like a fresh stitch, still carrying the faint burn of thread. I sat in the workshop until nearly dawn, not sleeping, not touching the unfinished shoes. The next morning I woke earlier than usual, brewed coffee, made a sandwich with dried beef, and packed it in a paper box. Marissa had loved that since she was little. She grew tired of it for a while, but after work got busy and she kept skipping breakfast, she returned to it. Just like me, walk far enough and you come back to your own feet. I drove to her apartment on the Pacific Grove hillside. The morning air was cold and the cars parked under the eucalyptus trees were dusted with a thin layer of mist. I rang the bell. Marissa opened the door, hair in a high bun, face still carrying last night's fatigue. "You're early, Dad?" She smiled faintly. Early is the only way to say what needs saying. I stepped in. The apartment smelled of dark wood and lavender. Marissa made me a cup of ginger tea and sat across from me, her hands clasped, as if she could sense what was coming. I set the box on the table. "I brought this for you, and something else." I took out my phone and played the recording. When Vivian's voice filled the quiet room, Marissa's eyes widened. When Colton admitted he was marrying her for money, her face drained as if her blood had been pulled out. At the part about the debt, she covered her mouth, and when she heard the plan to ruin her in the middle of her own wedding, she broke. She folded over, buried her face in her hands, and cried like someone whose spine had been snatched out. I sat there, not touching her. A father knows when to hold his child, and when to let her fall into her pain, so she can rise stronger. After a while, Marissa lifted her head. Her eyes were swollen, but her voice steadier. "Dad, how could they do that?" "Because they thought you'd never know, and because they believed you were too kind to suspect." Marissa wiped her tears and slowly said, "I was stupid, wasn't I?" "No," I shook my head. "You just trusted the wrong person." She went quiet for a long moment. Then her eyes changed, no longer shattered, more like leather after flame, scorched but stronger. She looked straight at me, her voice soft but sharp. "You've made thousands of shoes. You know exactly where to drive the nails to make them stand. Do that for me." Her words went through me like a nail driven into a heel block. Not painful, clarifying. I set my hand on the table and nodded slowly. "We'll do it, but not just to protect you, to make sure they never do this to anyone again." Marissa drew a deep breath. "What do we do first?" "Build a fake wedding," I said. "Make them think everything is going exactly how they planned. Then flip both of them in front of everyone." She didn't smile, but the corner of her mouth lifted, the way someone wounded but unbroken does. "Lead the way," she said. "I'll follow." That day, as I left her apartment, I knew something as clearly as the sound of a hammer on a wooden. Last in my shop. My daughter didn't just want to survive this wound. She wanted to reclaim everything, and I, a simple old shoemaker, would guide her step by step. I couldn't sleep that night. The small room behind the workshop was where I usually lay down after long work days, but tonight everything in it felt too tight. The walls lined with half-finished shoes, spools of thread, and sheets of dried leather hanging silently. They all felt like they were staring at me, asking how I planned to handle what was happening to my daughter. I sat at the desk, the warm yellow lamp casting a soft streak across the wood, but inside me was a cold stretch running from my chest to my gut. Around 6 a.m, I decided to call the one person I trusted to help rebuild everything without leaving a single gap. Jonathan Briggs. I'd known Briggs from a few small property disputes in town years ago. He'd been practicing law for more than 2 decades in San Mateo, known as a man who didn't say much, but every word hit like a nail driven into a heel. I called, not expecting him to pick up this early, yet his groggy voice answered. Alden, what's going on this early? I need to see you. Today. When? I'm already on my way, he sighed. Come, I'll make coffee. Briggs's office sat on the second floor of an old building near the Half Moon Bay harbor. Thick walls, heavy wooden doors, and the smell of paper and coffee blend. I pushed the door open and saw Briggs in a wrinkled shirt, holding a large ceramic mug. 3 hours ago, you called me. Briggs lifted his chin. From the look on your face, this is serious. I didn't circle it. I set my phone on the wooden desk and played the recording. Briggs leaned back, fingers interlaced. The longer he listened, the sharper his eyes grew, like a blade being freshly honed. When the last part of Colton and Vivian's conversation faded, Briggs stayed silent for a moment, then said, Do you understand what you're holding here, Alden? Too well, I said, my voice worn from lack of sleep. This is a coordinated family fraud plot, and worse, intentional wedding sabotage. This can go criminal. I don't want them rotting in prison out of spite. I just want to protect Marissa and make sure they never pull this on anyone else. To clean filth, you still need strong water, Briggs said. You came to the right man. He grabbed a pen, scribbled a few lines on a notepad, then began analyzing with the precision of someone inspecting every cut on a piece of leather before stitching. First, entrapment, Briggs stressed. You cannot suggest any illegal action to them. We only let them reveal themselves. And here, you already have proof they initiated the scheme. Clear as day. You didn't bait them, so no problem. I nodded. That eased part of the weight. Second, camera. If you want to record everything at this fake wedding, it must be legal. The venue needs a small sign about the size of a hand, placed at the entrance reading, This event may be recorded for documentation purposes. Placed correctly, clear enough, but not attention-grabbing. That makes it valid. I memorized every word. A clean trap begins with clean law. Third, Marissa must not sign anything. No contracts, no waivers, no agreements. Vivian may try to force a signature during chaos. Absolutely forbid it. I exhaled hard. She won't sign anything. Finally, Briggs leaned forward, pushing his glasses up his nose. You need probable cause from the Monterey sheriff before the wedding. This recording is strong. If we add a transcript and submit it with a copy of the original file, I'm confident they'll grant light surveillance, or at least keep an eye on the event. I asked, Do we need to file early? As early as possible. You're fighting someone cunning. We can't leave our flank open. Briggs stood, turned on the printer, and continued. I'll build the full legal framework in 2 days. But Alden, remember, once this starts, no softness. I looked up. The only thing soft is the leather on the shoes I'm making. Not this. Briggs gave a faint smile, but with respect behind it. The next 2 days were unlike anything I'd experienced. I'd stayed up to meet holiday deadlines, stitched until my fingers went numb to repair a pair of shoes for an old soldier who wanted to wear his wedding shoes to his wife's funeral. But nothing compared to the pressure of building a plan where every inch needed to be as precise as a stitch line. I slept barely 4 hours in 48. Most of the time was spent listening to Briggs, taking notes, sending emails, and reading statutes I never thought I'd touch. Briggs checked everything point by point. The script must feel natural, not staged. Where are the hidden cameras? How will you hide them? Audio needs to be clean enough that a prosecutor won't dismiss it. Who plays the witness? Who stands at the door? Who films the wide shot? I had never imagined that I, a shoemaker, would ever discuss camera angles, lighting offsets, or guest positioning, but I knew this. To protect my daughter, I had to relearn the world like an apprentice. By the second night, I sat in the workshop, looking around at the tools I'd lived with. Leather shears, heel hammers, pincers, conditioners, wax thread, and realized the skills I'd spent a lifetime building were helping me approach this plan in a way I'd never expected. When I hammer a nail into a heel, I always know how much force, what angle, and how to avoid cracking the sole. And this plan was the same. One wrong strike, and everything collapses. Briggs texted, "Tomorrow, 8 a.m., Monterey Sheriff. Appointment confirmed." I set the phone down and leaned back in my chair. The workshop light cast my shadow across the bench, long like the shadow of an old man standing before the last fight of his life. But this time, I wasn't fighting for my craft. I was fighting for my blood. The plan truly began the morning Briggs and I walked out of the Monterey Sheriff's headquarters with a signed copy of a search warrant, based on the recording I had brought. That recording, the one born from a moment when my hands were shaking, had now become the first nail in the revenge shoe Marissa and I were about to craft. But a nail was only the beginning. We still had to build the whole structure, shape the toe, stitch the body, and polish it until it could stand. A full operation needed its own stage. I knew Monarch Point Lodge was far too luxurious and full of staff for us to control. Just one curious stranger, one employee asking questions, or one manager comparing guest lists, everything would fall apart. So I had to find another place, similar enough, private enough, and controllable both in light and in sound. I drove around until late afternoon and finally stopped at a small event venue. Few people knew about, called Pacific Crest Pavilion, perched on the Monterey slope about 14 minutes from the main lodge. The pavilion wasn't large, but its architecture, half greenhouse, half lodge, with forest pine beams, gray stone floors, and a curved glass roof reflecting the afternoon sun, made it nearly indistinguishable from Monarch Point from a distance. I stepped inside and knew immediately. This was the blank shoe I could shape exactly as I wanted. I placed a deposit that same afternoon and signed a 2-day full rental contract. The manager was easygoing as long as I paid in full. I told them I needed to adjust the entire lighting system. Not to make new lighting, just lighting similar enough that people might think they're somewhere else. Meanwhile, all guests and relatives on the bride's side kept the original wedding schedule at Monarch Point Lodge. No one on my side was told about any venue change because our plan didn't require them to move. And on the groom's side, only Colton and his mother, Vivian, received a so-called upgrade notice. No one else in the Hayes family knew anything. That made the pavilion a stage that the two of them would believe completely. Marissa came with me to the pavilion that evening. We walked the room step by step, measuring the positions of the hanging lights, testing colors, and comparing every angle with the photos I had quietly taken during the rehearsal at Monarch Point. The original lodge lighting leaned amber gold while the pavilion's default was lighter. A few Kelvin adjustments and some filters made the match nearly 90%. Enough to fool Vivian, who never looked closely at anything. Marissa stood in the center of the room, watching the test lights glow, then turned to me. "Looks real. They won't notice." "They're used to fooling others, not being fooled," I said. I spent the next 2 days alone in the pavilion. The lighting technicians came and I gave them exact specs. When they asked how I knew so much, I simply said, "Long years in a craft. My eyes are trained." I couldn't tell them that light determines how a room feels, the same way the surface of leather determines how a shoe feels on the foot. When the lighting was perfect, I began the most delicate part: hiding cameras. No one understands the structure of boxes, leather layers, and hiding small objects inside them better than I do. I once inserted a thin steel plate into a ballerina's heel to help her balance better, and she never noticed. Now I would use that skill for something entirely different. I crafted 3 types of containers. 1, hollow toe boxes. I used a custom mold, carved a shallow space in the padding, placed a pea-sized camera, and sealed it with professional adhesive. I set a pair on a table as handmade by the bride's father. 2, shoe boxes, reinforced bottoms with thin wood, hiding cameras in a second layer with a hole disguised as a screw eye. From floor level, nothing looked odd. 3, gift boxes. I chose glossy hard paper boxes, punched discreet holes with a leather awl, hid cameras beneath patterns, and placed them on the gift table where Vivian would surely snoop. When I tested the footage, it was so sharp I could see dust on the tablecloth. Each camera fed into a small server hidden in my tool bag. The pavilion was no longer a venue. It had become my second workshop, except instead of hammering, it held the silence before retribution. Next step, 36 actors. I contacted a small theater troupe in Santa Cruz that I knew through an old client. The director listened to my idea, staging a fake wedding debate and expose a fraud scheme. She gave a half smirk and said, "Sounds like a TV drama, but if it's to protect your daughter, we're in." That evening, 3 vans full of actors, young, old, middle-aged, showed up at the pavilion. Some wore T-shirts, some had just finished Shakespeare rehearsal, and others still had stage makeup on. I stood before them with a rough map of seating, lighting flow, and movement paths. "I don't need perfect acting," I told them. "Just natural, like a real wedding. Those 2 will only glance at faces, not examine anyone." One actor asked, "What roles do we play?" "I'm dividing by family tree. You'll be cousins, family friends, and co-workers of the Alden family. You must remember your character's name, age, and job." A young woman laughed. "Like background roles in a Hollywood wedding." "I don't need glamour," I said. "I need believability." Marissa handed out a list of 16 main characters and 20 supporting ones. That night, the actors sat in clusters, memorizing who was married to whom, who divorced in what year, whose kid was how old, and what jobs they had. No one complained. They understood why I was doing this. When I stepped outside to breathe, a middle-aged actor followed me. "Mr. Alden," he said, "is making shoes harder than doing all this?" I laughed, the first laugh I'd had in days. "Hard in a different way." "Different how?" "I make shoes to help people walk, but now I'm building this place to make certain people stand still and show their true faces." He nodded. "Then we'll help you keep them still." That night, after everyone left, I sat alone in the pavilion. The yellow lights dimmed into a glow almost identical to the main lodge, except this place was entirely under my control. I looked around the room, feeling like I was studying the frame of a new shoe. Each column, each chair, each string of lights, these were pieces of material waiting for me to assemble into a finished product. I once wanted only to make beautiful shoes, so Marissa could walk far without pain. Now my goal was different. I wanted to build a stage where those who tried to trample my daughter would never stand steady again. If anyone had told me that nearing 70, I'd be standing in the middle of a hall, holding a fake family tree chart, and training 36 actors like a stage director, I would have laughed so hard I'd need to lean on a table to keep from falling. Yet that night at Pacific Crest Pavilion, that was exactly where I found myself, and strangely, I was calmer than ever. Maybe when a man works for his child, even the impossible becomes clear. I handed each actor an envelope with $125, payment for the first 3 hours of rehearsal. No one complained. All they needed was to know this wasn't illegal. Their director had already explained the reason: a father protecting his daughter from a filthy scheme. That alone made several of them look at me with an expression I never thought I deserved. I stood on a low wooden platform, clipboard in hand with the entire role distribution. "All right," I said, my voice rough from exhaustion. "Tonight, our job is to make your reactions so natural that anyone watching will believe every word, every look." A young actress with braided hair raised her hand. "How do you want us to react when that Vivian woman throws the photos?" I snorted. The way she said "that woman" lightened my chest. "I need each of you to show a different reaction, just like real life. In every wedding, when a scandal breaks, no 2 people react the same." I divided the hall into 3 groups. Group 1, the taken aback but polite guests, the kind who pretend not to notice drama but whose eyes tell a different story. Group 2, the whisperers, those who murmur, sneak photos, gossip quietly. Group 3, the openly annoyed, the type who can't hide their feelings, rolling eyes, pointing fingers, or spilling sharp little comments that thickened the air. I walked between the groups, explaining details. Group 1, you need to show internal conflict, trying to stay polite but still surprised. Group 2, keep your volume low but clear enough for the table mic to pick up. Group 3, show your emotions. Oh my God. No way. How disgusting. Things like that sound real. An older actor frowned. And how do you want us to react to the fake bride? I want everyone to believe she's Marissa, I said. Don't overdo the pity. People only pity once they know the truth, and at that moment, you're still acting. I opened my phone and played key parts of the recording, especially the part where Vivian insulted Marissa's appearance. She looks like discounted merchandise, bland figure, could pass for a lost waitress at her own wedding. A wave of discomfort went through the hall. Several actresses exchanged glances and shook their heads. One muttered, "Classic woman who humiliates others to feel powerful." I played Vivian's words about me. That old shoemaker who reeks of animal hide. Please, one sniff and you know. A few actors looked at me as if checking whether I was hurt. I shrugged. Every trade has a smell. At least leather smells like something real, not like lies. That earned a few quiet laughs. Not amused laughter, affirming laughter. Rehearsal began. I placed the actors playing Vivian and Colton in the center of the room. Let's try the moment Vivian exposes the photos, I said. The actress playing Vivian, a slightly heavy-set woman with sharp eyes and impressive cruelty in her delivery, stepped forward, lifted a white envelope, and yelled, "Stop the ceremony. I have something to show." I watched each group. Group 1 flinched slightly but kept composed postures. Group 2 instantly leaned toward each other, whispering. Group 3. God, they were more convincing than I expected. A curly-haired guy blurted, "What now? Did I come to a wedding or a TV show?" Someone else. Does she think this is reality television? Perfect volume. Natural reactions. I nodded in approval. We repeated the scene 10 times. Each round I adjusted something. Someone stood at the wrong angle. Someone reacted too strongly. Someone laughed off-beat. I corrected it the way I once corrected stiff toe curves or slightly crooked stitches. It was still craftsmanship, just with different materials. Mid-rehearsal, an actor asked, "Mr. Alden, if that Vivian woman insults your daughter directly, what do you want us to do?" I paused. The question hit the softest place in me. "I want everyone to react like real people react," I said, annoyed, sympathetic, and embarrassed for the bride. Make those two feel like they're facing a wall they can't break. I didn't want violence. I wanted them to feel the weight of judgment, the same judgment they used to crush others. During the second run, the actress playing Vivian added extra venom. "Look at her! A dress cheap as end-of-season clearance. Marrying into this family would be an embarrassment." The room went silent. Then someone in Group 3 said loudly, "She's prettier than you." The hall burst into laughter, but exactly the kind I wanted. Laughter at hypocrisy being exposed, not at the weak. I noted it. That line could work in the real performance. A soft but sharp counterstrike. After 2 hours, I gave them a break. I stood alone in the pavilion, watching the actors practice, adjust their roles, memorize the family tree. Some even practiced walking like people who'd known the Aldens for years. My throat tightened, not from weakness, but from gratitude. These strangers had stepped into a risky plan just to help a father pull his daughter out of the mud. Their director approached me. "You know," she said, "I've staged hundreds of shows, but none of them ever got actors this emotionally invested. Maybe because this one is real?" "It's too real," I said. "Real enough that I don't want my daughter to endure it twice, if even one detail goes wrong." She thought a moment, then placed a hand on my shoulder. "Don't worry. We'll make this fake wedding so real. The people trying to ruin it won't know the difference." Rehearsal ended near 10 at night. The actors trickled out, leaving behind a vast room, humming with faint light and the blend of pine wood and leather from my tool bag. I turned off each light slowly and walked toward the door. When the last lamp clicked off and darkness filled the pavilion, I felt something shift inside me, a rare stillness, like the moment a shoe's sole fits perfectly into the upper. Everything was falling into place, and the people who thought they'd turned my daughter into a public joke had no idea. They were the ones about to be seen clearly. I've turned stiff hides into soft curves, made rough patches disappear under a blade as if they never existed, but never in my life did I think I'd be reshaped, like some character stepping out of a 70s film. Yet that morning, in a small studio on the slope leading down to the Santa Cruz shoreline, I sat still in a swivel chair while 3 strangers examined every line of my face as if inspecting an antique in need of restoration. The head makeup artist, a woman around 50 with short silver hair named Maribel, stood behind me, arms crossed, eyes sharp like someone sharpening a blade. "You're worried Vivian will recognize you, right?" she asked, straight to the point. "I don't want a single opening," I said. "1 second is enough for her to ruin everything." Maribel nodded like she'd heard that sentence 100 times. "Then we create someone entirely new." They placed a card on the table in front of me. "Oscar Fielding, cousin on the mother's side, lives in Tacoma." I laughed. "Got the fake name ready, too?" The young assistant winked. "A fake wedding needs a fake relative. And your Uncle Oscar, the quiet, gentle, and extremely unpredictable man." I shrugged. "Sounds more fitting than my real name." They started by measuring my face. Maribel touched the bridge of my nose, traced along my jawline. "I need you to look softer," she said, "less defined. People who disappear in a crowd don't have distinctive features." "What about the leather smell?" I joked. Vivian could sniff that out a mile away. Maribel snorted. "I'll handle that. Beeswax mixed with sandalwood oil masks, everything." I was impressed. Few professions understood scent the way makeup artists did. They placed an ash-gray wig on my head, cut short, the kind you see on Northwest men who live under knit caps in cold seasons. When I looked in the mirror, I nearly didn't recognize myself. My normally broad forehead was softened by the lowered hairline, making me look kinder. Then they painted salt and pepper stubble along my jaw. "Graham Alden of Monterey keeps his mustache trimmed," Maribel said, "but Oscar Fielding, Tacoma local, repairs fishing nets for dock workers. He does not." I smirked. "A true Oscar." Next came the hands. Anyone in my trade knows hands are the hardest to hide. The grooves, the calluses, the hardened ridges, they tell your whole life story. Maribel opened a small jar of golden wax. "I can't erase the calluses," she said, "but I can make them look like a man who works on the docks, less rigid, more weathered by salt." She rubbed the beeswax across my hands. It absorbed slowly, tinting the skin a faint reddish tone, like it had been chafed by ocean wind. "Hands like these, Vivian won't connect them to a shoemaker from Monterey." I studied my hands under the warm lamp, almost feeling like I was looking at someone else's. Finally, they handed me a pair of thin-framed glasses. "Put them on," Maribel said. "Glasses alone change 20% of a face." I slipped them on and adjusted my posture. What stared back at me in the mirror made me go still. A stranger looked at me. Not Graham Alden, the man who bends hides and stitches lines for 40 years. In that reflection stood Oscar Fielding, a man with gentle eyes, a slower voice, a posture leaning slightly like someone used to working by the water. I whispered, "Well, who have I become?" Maribel smiled. "Someone your enemies will never think twice about." Then came the voice. Maribel had me stand in the middle of the room and read a few lines from a mock script. "Hello there, I'm Oscar, your mother's cousin." I read it in my normal tone, but she shook her head. "No, too sharp. Craftsmen speak quickly, cleanly. Oscar doesn't. He's slower, deeper, a bit hesitant." I tried again. "Hello there, I am Oscar." Slower. I lowered my tone. "Hello there, I'm Oscar." Maribel nodded. "That's it." A man who's lived his life beside the waves. No rush, no emphasis, no edges. I repeated it nearly 20 times until the new voice settled into my mouth like a pair of shoes, molded to my foot. At the end, Maribel turned on a warm desk lamp and inspected my face again. "Do you know the most important part of a disguise?" she asked. "I'm listening. Not the makeup, not the glasses, not even the voice. It's the breathing." She placed a hand on her chest. "Graham Alden breathes like a craftsman, steady, tight, economical. But Oscar Fielding breathes like a man used to cold winds. Deeper, longer." I inhaled. "Not rushed," she reminded. I exhaled slowly. "That's it." Funny how the smallest change mattered most. When I left the studio, the Santa Cruz sky had turned silver in the late afternoon. Sea wind passed through the wig, carrying a thin scent of salt. I saw my reflection in the car window, still my shape, but a different version. A version Vivian Hayes would walk past without a second glance. I got in the car, started the engine, and looked into the rearview mirror. "Welcome," I murmured. "Oscar Fielding." And for the first time since all of this began, I felt the fear inside me drop a level. Not because I'd become someone else, but because for the first time, I knew I could walk into this battle while my enemy had no idea they were dealing with a man who had more than one face. The morning of the fake wedding had a strange kind of light, not fully clear, not quite dim, as if Monterey itself were holding its breath with me. I parked 2 blocks from Pacific Crest Pavilion and sat in the truck for a few minutes to steady my breathing. The outfit of Oscar Fielding was already on, a light gray rough-knit cardigan, slightly wrinkled khaki pants, and a pair of loafers I'd purposely aged to fit the story of the uncle from Tacoma. My phone buzzed. A text from Colton. "Can't wait to take your breath away today." The kind of cheap romance he always used. Reading it alone made my chest tighten. I opened the next message. Marissa had replied with exactly 3 words. "Yeah, see you." Cold as someone signing for a package. No extra warmth, no wasted letters. I closed my eyes. My daughter was acting stronger than she really felt. I stepped into the pavilion at 1:20 p.m. The fake guests filled about 2/3 of the hall. 36 actors, each wearing their own backstory, stood exactly where they were trained to stand. Some seated, some chatting, some inspecting the wedding gifts, some genuinely gossiping. The smell of pine wood, the soft gold of the chandeliers, and the tap of shoes on stone flooring reminded me of nights working late in my workshop. Every detail here was a prop in an elaborate play, and I was the only one forbidden to reveal even a twitch out of character. I walked down the aisle slowly, remembering Oscar Fielding's gait, slow, a little heavy, like a man who lived near docks and dragged his feet across damp wooden planks. I could not walk like shoemaker Graham Alden, silent, precise, balanced. A young actress playing a distant cousin looked at me and gave a tiny nod. Everything was ready. I returned a subtle nod and slipped into the 4th row, blending into the crowd. 10 minutes to 2, Vivian arrived. I heard her shoes before I saw her, sharp, pointed heels, the kind worn by someone used to ordering others around. She stepped inside with a cloud of overpowering perfume, the sort that gave headaches more than pleasure. The moment she crossed the threshold, she didn't smile. She squinted, scanning everything, tablecloth tones, gift table layout, chair count, ribbon placement, then the guests. Staring, slowly, Colton followed behind, nervous. Vivian was not. She looked like a hunter tracking prints. I lowered my head further, adjusted my glasses, kept the perfect shoulder droop of Oscar Fielding, a forgettable stranger. Vivian turned in a slow circle, lips tight. I knew what that meant. She was counting. Every single person. The actors had rehearsed for this, but still, I felt a faint numbness in my hands. Vivian began counting under her breath. 7, 8, 9, 12, 13. Colton whispered, "Mom, please. People are looking." "Quiet," she snapped. You don't see anything strange? I watched from the corner of my eye, never directly. Marissa once told me Vivian could feel eyes on her. Suspicion was her first language. Vivian scanned the room. I felt she was seconds from noticing something. Or worse, noticing me. I lowered my voice to the quietest mumble, like an old man muttering to himself. Haven't been to a wedding this far in a while. Just a few words, but in Oscar Fielding's tone. Slow, worn, a little airy. I felt my facial muscles shift into character. It worked. Vivian glanced my way, but didn't stop. Her gaze slid past, as if I were unimportant. I exhaled silently. Then she scanned the room again. Where's the photographer? Her voice rang like glass clinking. Colton stammered. They said they'd be early. And early means what? She hissed. Without proper photos, the plan... She abruptly stopped, checking if anyone heard. We did. She just didn't know it. A thread-straight silence followed. I waited for the door to open. And it did. Just as she seemed ready to walk back to the gift table, where two of my hidden cameras were placed, the fake photographer, an actor named Mateo, walked in with an expensive mirrorless camera hanging from his neck. Sorry, everyone, he said loud enough. Highway 1 was a mess. Fog's thick today. Lines spoken by 100 photographers every week. Vivian nodded immediately, her face easing. Fog all the time here, she said, sounding like someone who just regained control. Go set up. Mateo smiled politely and began checking the lighting, aiming his lens at a few groups to test shots. Vivian watched him, her suspicion softening. A perfect distraction. I saw the actors lean deeper into their roles. The whispering group murmured, the polite group stayed composed, and two people next to me even pretended to scroll through photos from last weekend, though their phones were empty. Colton leaned toward Vivian and whispered, Mom, everything's fine. Relax. Vivian exhaled long. I just want everything perfect. You know that. People only use the word perfect when they're about to do something terrible. I clenched my faux-weathered hands. The beeswax changed their texture, but the tension inside them was still mine. We were halfway across the bridge. No turning back. Vivian moved to the gift table, tugging at the corners of the cloth, touching the beige gift boxes. Right beneath her fingers, less than an inch, sat two cameras hidden in a shoebox false bottom and a thread-thin microphone pressed under the fabric. She swept her hands across it all and noticed nothing. She couldn't. Every detail was hidden with techniques only a craftsman would know. Cameras buried in dyed leather layers, microphones flattened like stitch lines. I knew the art of disappearing objects into ordinary things. Today I used it to protect my daughter. 2:05. The pavilion lights shifted warmer, a cue that the program was about to begin. I inhaled deeply. Vivian returned to the front row, adjusted her shawl, and held the envelope containing the fake photos, an envelope she'd soon lift with theatrical triumph. I watched her back, feeling cold as stone. The curtain was rising, but the person being exposed today wasn't my daughter. The sound inside the pavilion settled just as the wall clock hit 3:30. The background music cut out as if an invisible hand had gripped the strings and snapped them silent. Warm lights fell across the soft curls of the fake bride, Lila Reed, whose height, posture, and way of walking matched Marissa almost exactly from a distance. The veil covering most of her face hid just enough, and the space between the rows made any doubt disappear. Even I, who had watched my daughter for 30 years, felt my chest tighten, as if Marissa herself were walking down the aisle. Then Vivian shot to her feet. Her sharp heels struck the wooden floor like a hammer on a shoe's body. "Stop this wedding!" she screamed, slicing the air like a blade tearing canvas. The fake guests turned their heads in perfect sync with the rehearsed script. But the shock in their eyes wasn't acting. Something real was spreading through the room, the raw truth of public humiliation. Vivian yanked a white envelope from her purse and held it high like supreme evidence. "This girl betrayed my son. I have proof." Lila, the fake bride, froze. Her hand crushed the bouquet until the rose petals bent. She was so good it made me uncomfortable, because it felt like Marissa truly stood there. Vivian stormed toward her and flung the envelope to the floor, the forged photos sliding out under the lights. Crude composites, but enough to destroy a wedding if no one knew the truth. Look at this. This is the so-called future daughter-in-law you're all praising. Her shrill voice sent waves of shame rolling across the pavilion. The whispering group began reacting on cue. I can't believe it. God, at the wedding, poor Colton. Colton, off to the left, played his shocked part, as instructed, but in his eyes I saw something unmistakable. Hunger. He had waited for this moment. He wanted to watch the bride collapse in front of everyone. He craved the scene he thought would crush my daughter's dignity. I, still as Oscar Fielding, stood up. Not dramatically, just the slow, upright rise of an older man, troubled by wrongdoing. Hold on, I said, keeping Oscar's voice low, slow, trailing. No one should be shamed like this in front of a crowd. Vivian whipped around, her eyes stabbed into me like a nail point. Then she spat a line that burned my chest. Oscar Fielding? Some nobody uncle no one even knows trying to meddle in my family's business? The whole room stilled. Vivian looked me up and down, her voice hard as a honing stone. You think that flimsy, distant relative title lets you tell me what to do? Poor nobody pretending to matter. Where exactly do you belong in this family? I heard my teeth grind, but Oscar Fielding was not allowed to be angry. And Graham Alden, the father who once left dinner unfinished to fix the first pair of shoes his daughter ever wore, could not afford to ruin this plan. I lowered my eyes for a beat. The old uncle persona had to look misplaced, insignificant, so she'd feel even more invincible. Vivian smirked, thinking she'd crushed me, and in that moment she revealed her true self completely. Colton stepped forward at his cue, feigning anguish, shaking his head, raising his hand like a man about to crumble. He glanced around, clearly debating whether to continue playing the heartbroken groom. Greed won. He bent down and began scooping up wedding gifts, picking them up, stacking them on a cart, then picking up more. He moved with the speed of someone who'd rehearsed this, because he had. Vivian shouted, "Take everything! My son will not marry a cheater!" The actors responded right on script. Group 1, shocked but polite. Group 2, whispering, eyes widened. Group 3, furious, "You've gone too far." No one deserves to be humiliated like this. Vivian only looked more triumphant hearing them. She thought that was her power, power to crush. A bride in front of everyone. She waved her hand. "Hurry, Colton, take it all. The valuable ones go separate. I know that Tiffany box has something expensive." Everything was being recorded. The camera hidden in the beige shoebox, rolling. The camera under the flower table, rolling. The thread-thin mic under the tablecloth, capturing everything. Mateo's handheld camera, 2 more angles. Vivian was tightening her own noose. The fake bride, Lila, knelt to pick up a few photos. Menthol tears falling right on cue. Vivian pointed at her face. "You pathetic thing think you can cry. Trash like you doesn't deserve to step into my family." The entire hall recoiled. I felt blood pounding at my temples. But I only said one line, slow, quiet, unmistakable. "No one deserves to be treated like that." Vivian spun toward me, sneering, "And what do you know? A stray relative with no place in this ceremony thinks he gets to speak? Nobody here needs your opinion." She laughed. Colton laughed. Those 2 laughs told me the moment had come. At exactly 3:33, a light flickered under the wedding cake table. The hidden screen. Vivian frowned. "What is that?" Colton walked over, bent down. The screen was streaming live footage of Marissa, the real bride, standing at the real venue in Carmel Highlands, smiling, calm, untouched. Marissa raised her hand and waved. Vivian stumbled back as if slapped by ice. What is... How?" I looked at her. This time not with the eyes of Oscar Fielding, but with the eyes of Graham Alden, the father she thought she could grind under her heel without consequence. The flash of light under the gift table wasn't an ordinary glow. It appeared like a cold slash, cutting through the heavy air inside the pavilion. Vivian took one step forward, then froze as the image sharpened on the LED screen. Not a fake photo, not a forged document, not the fake bride standing before her, but Marissa, my daughter, standing in the real wedding hall, Monarch Point Lodge. Not in some temporary room, but in front of 127 real guests, all from my side. Relatives, old friends from Carmel, Marissa's co-workers, the faces that had watched her grow up, mature, fall, and rise. They were all present at the real ceremony. The wedding I protected like thin, untreated leather, kept hidden until the exact moment it was meant to see light. Under the ceiling lights of the real venue, Marissa's gown glowed just enough to show every soft fold as she moved. Her hair was pinned up, her face calm. So calm I nearly forgot this was the climax of a revenge plan, not the moment a father was about to give away his daughter. Marissa looked straight into the camera, the steady gaze of someone who knows she holds the power. Her voice came through the pavilion's speakers, sharp but unforced, like a thin blade slicing lengthwise through fabric. "Hello, Vivian." Inside the pavilion, the air froze like curing cement. Then, a synchronized rip. 36 actors scattered throughout the room raised their hands to their heads. Wigs came off, one after another, revealing real faces, young, old, men, women, none belonging to the Alden family. Vivian thought she'd been humiliating. Each rip sounded like a stitch being pulled from a badly made shoe, exposing the truth underneath. Vivian stumbled back, eyes wide. Every piece of false confidence she brought into the pavilion collapsed in seconds. She looked around, the cousins, the aunts, the family friends. She thought she was shaming were nothing more than Santa Cruz stage actors, people paid to witness her drag herself to her own downfall. Marissa continued on the screen. "Vivian, if your goal was to humiliate me in front of a crowd," she paused, letting the words sink fully into the room, "then you should at least make sure that crowd isn't made of actors." The line dropped into the pavilion like a stone thrown into a still lake. No shattering sound, just expanding rings. Vivian collapsed to her knees, as if every nerve in her body had been unplugged. Colton stood frozen, still holding the gift box he had tried to steal minutes earlier, now nothing but evidence in his hands. I watched them in the disguise of Oscar Fielding, but with the heart of Graham Alden. They wanted to tear my daughter apart in front of a crowd? I simply replaced that crowd with a giant mirror so they could finally see themselves. The noise in the pavilion dissolved, replaced by a heavy, syrup-thick silence, the kind that forms only when something irreversible has just happened. Vivian collapsed onto the floor, and Colton stood as if electrocuted. The fake photos they'd once been so confident throwing at the bride now lay scattered around their feet like dead leaves after a storm. Then another sound rose, footsteps, not Vivian's sharp heels, not Colton's loafers. Tactical boots, light, firm, decisive. The pavilion doors opened, and Detective Sophia Marin stepped in. Briggs had told her the estimated moment Vivian would reveal the photos. Sophia had waited in the parking lot, simply waiting for our signal. Light from outside glinted against the silver badge on her belt. She was an investigator from the Financial Crimes Division of the Monterey County Sheriff's Office, the one I had given the full rehearsal recording to 48 hours earlier. I remembered our first meeting, her voice calm but firm. "Mr. Alden, once I have proper probable cause, I won't let anyone harm your daughter another inch." Today she kept her word. Sophia lifted a thick folder containing the probable cause warrant, embossed with Judge Harold Lomax's seal, signed the previous night, based on the recording of Vivian and Colton plotting fake infidelity, intentional theft of high-value wedding gifts, and sabotaging a ceremony using fabricated evidence. All prepared, legally, all by the book. Sophia read aloud, clear and steady. Vivian Hayes and Colton Hayes, under the authority of the Superior Court of Monterey County, you are both being detained for investigation regarding organized fraud, property theft, and intentional harm through falsified information. Step away from this area immediately. Vivian sprang up. You have no right. This is a family matter. Sophia extended a hand, firm. I do have that right under court order, Mrs. Hayes. And this stopped being family the moment you planned theft and fraud on a live recording. Colton looked around, mouth opening and closing like he was searching for an apology that could save him. There wasn't one. 2 other officers stepped in behind Sophia, one on each side like stone pillars. No shouting, no force. The cold weight of the law didn't need theatrics. Vivian was cuffed first. Colton froze. Sophia turned to him. Mr. Hayes, you have the right to disclose everything for consideration of leniency, but all statements must be on camera. No verbal deals. He nodded rapidly, not resisting at all. What he feared wasn't the cuffs. It was the giant screen replaying his own face while conspiring with his mother. Sophia signaled to the officers, separate interrogation rooms, full video. Miranda writes as soon as they enter. I heard every line like a hammer against a shoe sole. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you. You have the right to an attorney. Vivian muttered curses under her breath, but every word snagged in her throat. Colton slumped, nearly dragging his feet as they led him away. I stepped back, not wanting to interfere, but Sophia approached, her eyes carrying a respect I didn't feel worthy of. Mr. Alden, she said quietly, we found 3 older case files tied to Mrs. Hayes. I narrowed my eyes. Fresno, 2012. Tacoma, 2015. Sacramento, 2019. Sophia unfolded the documents. Fresno, staging a false accusation during an engagement party to manipulate public perception. Tacoma, orchestrating a scandal to seize all the groom's family wedding gifts. Sacramento, sabotaging a ceremony with fake evidence to force a breakup in exchange for compensation. All 3 cases were closed due to lack of proof. But today, with the pavilion footage, the rehearsal recording, Colton's admissions, they could all be reopened. I stood still. My daughter, had she not heard that hallway recording, had we not brought in Santa Cruz Playhouse, had I not gone to Briggs and Sophia, might have become case number 4. The thought chilled me to the spine. I wasn't present during Colton's interrogation, but when I later watched the footage through the one-way mirror camera, the reflection alone told the entire story. He leaned forward, hands clenched, voice cracking. It was my mom's idea. I just did what she said. I just wanted the gifts. I didn't mean to hurt Marissa that much, Sophia replied flatly without judgment. You agreed to fake evidence. You prepared the cart. You participated in collecting the gifts. Each action was intentional. Colton bowed his head. He couldn't deny a single point. In the adjacent room, Vivian didn't cry. She screamed. His daughter ruined my family. I was just protecting my son. You stupid cops are being fooled. Sophia leaned closer to the observation glass, glancing at me as if to say, see? She doesn't realize she's drowning in her own whirlpool. Everything was recorded. No evidence out of reach. No, he said, she said. Only the truth, clean as a leather hide scraped bare before tanning. When Sophia left the interrogation room, she turned back and spoke softly so only I could hear. Rest easy. From here on out, they won't touch Marissa ever again. The law will speak for you. I exhaled. Not relief exactly, more like the feeling of a craftsman placing the final stitch on a shoe, knowing his part of the work is done. In that moment, I wasn't Oscar Fielding or Graham Alden, just a father standing at the boundary he'd kept intact at all costs. It took several weeks of investigation and paperwork, but by this morning everything had come together, for courtroom number 3 of the Monterey Courthouse. I had never walked into the Monterey Superior Court with the kind of feeling I carried that morning. In my hands was the box holding Marissa's wedding shoes she never got to wear, the leather still carrying the faint scent of linseed oil, reminding me of what I had crafted with both my hands and my faith, while they plotted to crush my daughter. Courtroom number 3 glowed with a cold sort of light, rows of wooden benches, the smell of stale coffee mixed with legal paperwork. Monterey County DA Ellis opened the case file with a decisive motion, then presented to Judge Bennington the full slate of evidence. 6 cameras from Pacific Crest Pavilion, the rehearsal recording at Monarch Point Lodge, and the lawfully recorded statements. At the defense table, Vivian Hayes sat in the beige suit she once wore with pride, but today it only made her trembling hands more obvious, while Colton kept his head down, collar wrinkled, eyes hollow like someone who woke up somewhere unfamiliar. When the first video played, the shoebox camera, showing Vivian whispering to her son that 3:30 will take her down, I saw the judge tap his pen lightly on the notebook, steady and cold. Next came the footage of Colton loading wedding gifts onto the cart, muttering, "This will fix my crypto mess," and the entire courtroom fell silent. This was the moment I truly watched Vivian shatter, arrogance turning to panic as she saw herself on the big screen, screaming, "Stop the ceremony!" Her attorney tried to rise and claim emotional agitation, but the judge cut him off instantly. She initiated the plan, collaborated to fabricate evidence. There is no agitation defense here. When Colton walked to the stand, I knew he would do the one thing he'd always done, save his own skin. And he did, his voice rough but clear, testifying bluntly. "My mother organized everything. She bought the fake photos. I only went along because of my crypto debt," politely selling out his mother to keep his own legal life intact. After reviewing all 6 camera angles and audio, the judge declared, Vivian Hayes, 4 years in prison, parole review after 2, seizure of all assets tied to the case, and a 10-year no-contact order with the victim, and Colton, 3 years of probation, 600 hours of community service, $18,000 restitution to Marissa, and a decade-long no-contact order. But the humiliation didn't end there. That same afternoon, DA Ellis received a call from a mother in Fresno crying as she said, "Vivian Hayes did the exact same thing to my daughter in 2019. I thought my daughter was making it up. Now I want to file a case." The file was immediately extended to the federal level. An officer whispered to me in the hallway, "She might be tied to 2 more cases. These kinds of scams usually collapse like dominoes." I sat down on the wooden bench, set the wedding shoes on my knees, watching the hallway lights reflect across the brown leather like 2 long stitches. In that moment, I knew the very thing they planned to destroy Marissa with had turned around and crushed them instead. Justice landing exactly like a hammer on the right spot. I returned to Alden's Leatherworks on a Monterey morning when the fog still clung thinly to the road, and the warm shop light flipped on the moment I pushed open the door, shining down on the scarred workbench as if illuminating the worn-out days my daughter and I had scraped through. I'd hung the sign closed for repair for a full week after the trial, not to repair shoes, but to repair my own breath and heartbeat. And today, when everything had finally settled, I opened the drawer and took out a sheet of Italian calfskin in amber, a leather I only used for shoes that marked a new beginning, laid it on the bench, and wrote on the inner lining a thin, steady line of words, "For new steps, for new love, for new life." The hammer tapped against the toe piece in an even rhythm, not fast, not rushed, like the beat of my heart settling again after weeks stretched tight like an overpulled thread. Every strike on the leather felt like tapping old wounds, but this time there was no pain, only clarity. That afternoon, Marissa stopped by the shop, hair tied neatly, her face no longer carrying the drained, paper-white look she had the day she first heard the recording. She's in therapy every week. The way she told me about her first session made me realize she was learning how to trust again, not the naive kind of trust she used to have, but the trust of someone who has stared straight into darkness and still chooses to move forward. She lifted the pair of shoes I was working on, peeled back the leather, and read the words I'd carved inside. She didn't say anything. Her eyes were wet but steady. "You're starting over too, Dad." I smiled softly. "Yeah, just like you." She leaned her head on my shoulder for a few seconds, a small moment, but enough to replace 1,000 comforting sentences. When she left the shop, I watched her walk away, her stride firm again, not the hunched posture of someone escaping a trap, but the walk of a person rebuilding a life. That night, after closing up, I opened the cabinet and took out the silver gray wig, the thick-framed glasses, the salt and pepper beard pieces, and the tin of beeswax that made my hands look older. I set them all on the bench, looking at each item the way you look at tools borrowed from a life you had to step into to protect your child. I removed each piece slowly, then hung the wig on an old wooden hook behind the door, the same place I once hung the first pairs of practice shoes I ever made. The wig swayed gently in the night breeze coming in through the cracked door, as if saying goodbye to Oscar Fielding, the only role in my life worth more than any settlement. As I cleaned the bench, the warm shop light fell on the new shoes, now 2/3 finished, the stitching straight, the edges smooth, the shape standing firm like the spine of someone who has survived a storm season. I rested my hand on the leather, warm by the lamp, and spoke quietly to myself, but also to my daughter, and to the man I had become. Leather only grows strong after fire. People too. Outside, the Monterey winds slipped through the doorway, carrying salt and the scent of old wood. I blew out the lamp, leaving the new shoes resting on the bench like a promise. From here on, every step Marissa takes will no longer be a step running from darkness, but a step toward a new life, steady, deliberate, and never bowed again. When I turned off the workshop light that night, the smell of leather and linseed oil still clung to my hands, like the imprint of a journey I never thought I'd have to walk. But people are strange. We only learn how strong we truly are when the ones we love are pushed into darkness. I've made thousands of shoes in my lifetime, but only one pair led me to this day. My daughter's, the pair that marked a life stepping out of fire. Justice is not always the sound of a gavel in a courtroom. Sometimes it's just the soft tapping of a father's hammer on leather, deciding no one will ever trample his family again. If this story touched something in you, a memory, a wound, or a moment when you had to stand up for someone you love, leave and tell me which city you're watching from. It helps this channel keep telling these journeys of justice in the truest way possible. Thank you for listening with the quiet of your own heart.